Hi everyone. In this video, we want to talk about large language models in the startup ecosystem. I think we're all seeing a massive hype here where many startups are building products on top of the infrastructure that OpenAI and ChatGPT provide. And this video is about whether that's a overhyped fad or a genuine game changer. And I'm not talking about the consumer perspective here. I'm talking about the business perspective, and not purely the business perspective, but the should I build a product on top of OpenAI, ChatGPT, and similar LLMs right now perspective. So I want to cover 2 points, what I'm seeing and what investors are asking. I work with a lot of startups trying to raise capital. I am also a former investor, so that's a good perspective for me to take. And we will jump right into that. If you don't know what LLMs, OpenAI, ChatGPT, and stuff like that are, you must be living under a rock as a business owner. You need to know those things. Minimally, you need to know those things to start thinking about how you can apply them to streamline your business processes, get more juice out of your company with fewer resources. That is definitely possible with what's already out there. But I hope you have already taken the next step and are actively thinking whether it would make sense to use these products, these capabilities as part of your existing products or to deploy a new one. And that's what we're going to discuss today. Now, I'm the founder and CEO of Zenok Labs. We help startups and select enterprises grow. We focus on product market fit, go-to-market, and venture capital because these are the 3 root causes of the lack of growth, which is usually why startups fail. Now, let's get started with what I'm seeing. The first one is, and you see that as a bullet point below the post-it, it's a significant accelerator for startups that I'm working with. I work with a bunch of startups that have pivoted from their legacy business model to using some kind of chatbot-related capabilities or automation in their core product. And it has changed. For whatever reasons, consumers are just currently trying to explore different ChatGPT-based products. It probably actually drives real value for consumers and customers alike. And so whenever a business has switched from A to B, where B is LLM usage, I do see a pretty significant ramp in terms of adoption and traction. In addition to that, there are pure play and native, whatever you want to call it, LLM-based startups, the ChatGPT-based startups, and they can go viral on social media. They post something there. It's just it's hyped. Everyone is looking for the next use case and is adopting it pretty significantly. One trend that I definitely don't like when I talk about what I'm seeing is how influencers are building digital avatars or virtual avatars to have their audiences chat with them on sort of a minute-based basis. For instance, every minute is $5. It's a little bit like the OnlyFans model, just more expensive on a different type of activity. But I think that just is not good value for humanity. That's my personal perspective, though. And fundamentally, as a business, it's probably a good one. Though we will talk about investors, what investors are asking and what builders need to be thinking about in just a minute. So what I'm seeing is it's a significant accelerator, and there are some things I'm not a huge fan of right now in the LLM world with regard to building businesses and products on top of it. Now, the real juice is in what investors are asking and what builders need to figure out. And on a high level, these are 3 parts. The first one is it a nice to have or is it a must have? What are the unit economics and is it defensible? And let's break that down a little bit more. Nice to have versus must have. I think everyone in the investment activity and what builders need to figure out here is what's a short-term gimmick, what can be replaced, what is actually driving fundamental business value that cannot be replaced easily. That's the case that you see many times between enterprise, or a question that you also try to answer between enterprise solutions and mid-market or lower market solutions, where enterprise is usually pretty deeply ingrained in processes and core operating systems of businesses, hard to replace, whereas some kind of app where you can track your habits or something like that is not particularly sticky. People can churn out of that pretty easily. And that's not a great place to be in because you have a leaky bucket that you constantly need to fill top of the funnel for people to drop out at the bottom, and that just consumes a lot of resources, energy, and motivation. One reason or one way to figure out whether people are actually committed to what you're building versus just downloading it and then never really activating or them not retaining from your perspective on the product is monetization. Just start charging money. You will see a massive spike in churn, but the ones that stay are the ones that benefit, and then you can focus on these power users in terms of data tracking, interviews, and building capabilities and features to increase your customer lifetime value, decrease your customer acquisition cost, decrease your churn, and ultimately build a viable business. Right? So there is a major question that investors are asking: what's a nice to have versus what is going to stay? And that is not entirely clear. My suggestion is monetize and build a product that people want to keep using. The second one is a major area too, and it's actually pretty terrible, which is interesting: unit economics. The problem with anything based on, for instance, OpenAI is that it's not your infrastructure and they're charging you a lot of money. I don't necessarily think that they have fantastic unit economics, but they have to pay for computational power, for compute power. And so LLMs are just heavy on computational power, and that's why unit economics are usually very low. What I see many times with startups that use them is that and monetize is that they have unit economics of below 30% gross margins. And anything less than, and I mean 30% and less gross margins as a software business is terrible. That's the entire allure of software, right? That you have high gross margin with minimal costs of goods sold. If you think about how gross margins are calculated, it's revenue minus cost of goods sold. That's your gross margin. Cost of goods sold are the additional cost that you have for selling one more unit of your product. For instance, if you're selling an e-commerce product, the problem with e-commerce is that, let's say you're selling shoes. Every time you sell a shoe, you have to manufacture the shoe. That costs you money. So your gross margins are already going to be pretty tight, and the rest has to pay for your overhead as a business. In software, usually the incremental unit that you create costs you nothing. Same in content, but in anything LLM related, that's not the case. The incremental unit that you create costs you significant amounts of money, leads to very tight margins, which is just not an interesting business model. So you need to figure out what your path to improve your unit economics are, and ideally already have made progress on that path. Shoot for anything as close to 80% as possible, because that's going to lead to beautiful net margins if you get up to that level. You don't have to be there on day one, but be able to articulate what your plan is. And the best startups that I have seen here, and I'm not a technical founder, so I cannot give you the specific advice on how to reduce computational energy or resource use, but what I've seen is that startups that are on the path to figuring this out are building their own models where they're optimizing them for their use case and get the data requirement and the data processing requirements down from what it was before to what it will be in the future. So fewer data that gets churned and mined leaves you with healthier unit economics and potentially even a better result, since you're optimizing everything for your use case. And then the second part is, again, coming back to monetization. Test monetization, test the willingness to pay, increase prices until consumers start to churn out at such a high rate that the additional margins that you're making are not worth it. But on average, more and higher prices, better margins are more valuable than having more users versus or reducing churn. But you can model this out in an Excel or in a Google Sheet, whatever you're using, to see the real effect on your own business yourself. And ultimately, if none of that is working, you may want to switch to a usage-based pricing model where you're saying, hey, for every 10 messages or for every blah, 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 whatever it is that you're doing, you're going to pay extra. And so that is critical. Unit economics, every investor is asking, can this turn into a viable business model? 30% and less is totally unattractive, and be aware of that. The third one is defensibility. Right? The issue is that you're building your product on someone else's infrastructure, in this case, most likely OpenAI, which makes you vulnerable. Think of Apple, think of the Google Play Store. These are, especially Apple is a, if you ask me, is a monopole. It's a terrible place to be. If they shut down your app, you're screwed. Happened to me personally and the startup that I built in the past. And this is now happening with OpenAI too. It's an infrastructure layer. It's super interesting for investors to invest in infrastructure layer because they have such high power and ability to monetize what they're doing. In your case, if you're using it, it's not great though. And the second one is that most products that are currently developed, like photo editors or copywriting stuff, is just completely replaceable and doesn't really have a unique sauce. If you go to a platform like Fiverr, for instance, where you can find talent to hire for gigs, you'll find people that built you ChatGPT-based products or OpenAI-based products for as little as 5K, maybe if you have more requirements, 10 to 20K. That's just not a lot of cash relative to what a fully fledged enterprise solution would usually cost, or even a mobile app. You won't get it for that level of pricing. So there are these two issues. Now, what are your opportunities to navigate these issues based on what I've seen startups do? The first one is collect your own proprietary data. So whatever it is that you're building in, make sure that you ask for data from consumers and customers, so that in a data privacy compliant way, of course, that you own that data and then can use it as a selling point. You could technically sell that data later on. Data is very valuable. Or you can use it to optimize your own models. And that's the second point. Potentially build a proprietary model where you optimize that model for your own use case. A little bit early for me to say what that exactly will look like, but I've seen startups do that and be very successful with it, which should also help you with unit economics potentially. And then the third one is getting a feedback loop. I think every investor sees high potential in OpenAI-based products that are related to outcomes, or that have some kind of link or ability to track outcomes. For instance, let's say you're building a resume writer for consumers. Well, in that case, you ideally want your users to upload their resumes. You want ideally to build your proprietary model, and you ideally want users to tell you which resume is good and which one is bad. Even better if it somehow links into application processes that you get real-life feedback from recruiters. And that feedback loop, that data loop, is going to create a flywheel for you that could potentially lead to defensibility for your startup. And that's the third question that every investor is asking here, in addition to the other two ones, which are also going to be, you also need to figure out. All right, that's it in terms of whether it's an overhyped fad or a genuine game changer. If you have questions, drop them in the chat below, in the comment section. I'll get back to you. If you enjoyed this video, leave me a thumbs up. I definitely look for these types of signals in terms of the type of content that's appreciated or disliked. And if you enjoyed, consider leaving a subscribe because it helps me as a content creator. I would love it. All right, that's it. Have a great day. Bye-bye.